Welcome to All Clear. I'm Travis. Good to have you with us again. Got a local fella from North Carolina with us. I've got Tim Grutzius. Now, Tim is a specialist in a certain art, and that is the art of yoga. And I know a lot of people are already starting to hit the button to turn it off, but yoga is something we need to talk about. Tim, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great, Travis. Thanks for having me on here.
Hey, it is a pleasure. I know we know some people in common, and it's just kind of weird how these little circles kind of come together. But I am glad to be able to talk with you. Now, one of the things that's unique about you is that you are both a yoga instructor practitioner and a first responder.
I'm a retired first responder. Yes.
Retired first responder. So why don't we dig into that a little bit? What's your story as a first responder?
Okay. What my story as a first responder, how I got there was by way of really the military. I spent a few years in the Army in the Mojave Desert of California. When I was there, I took my uh, EMT basic at Barstow Community College. And then when I got out of the service, I got a job with a private ambulance company. I'm originally from Illinois, so I went back there. And from there, I went to paramedic school, and my GI Bill paid for that. And once I got through paramedic school, I got hired by another private ambulance company that actually did, instead of just transport, 911 operations. And then I just started gradually testing for different fire departments. And I landed on the ALSUP Fire Department in 1994. And that's about, it borders the south side of Chicago by maybe not even 5 minutes from one of our stations. And then it's about 20, 30 minutes from downtown Chicago on a good traffic day. As I went along in my career, starting, I thought, just like everybody else, this is gonna be cool. I'm gonna change the world. I was influenced because I'm 60 years old. I was influenced by Johnny Gage and Roy DeSoto from the old Emergency show, which was on back in the early 70s. And I'm like, this is great. It's gonna work out great. I'm realizing my dreams uh, of doing this type of work. Uh, as I went along, you just start learning the ins and outs that it's not all as TV would have it, like, and they didn't really do this back then, but they kind of sanitize a little bit or make it Hollywoodized. When you get into the real world, it's not that, and you end up in a lot of dangerous situations. Uh, and it was back in 1998. As I started as a rookie, made it through my probation, got set with a crew. And one of the guys there, he was to me a fireman's fireman, a paramedic's paramedic. And his uniforms were always to the nines, pressed neatly, everything. But what we didn't know about him is that he had this inner struggle going on. And years later, talking with his parents, he was diagnosed with clinical depression in high school. And this is stuff that turned on and off for him. Well, in February of 1998, and maybe a little bit before that, he started unraveling a lot of anger management, fighting with his wife on the phone, ripping phones off the wall, stuff like that. Some of the guys, were helping him out because him and his wife had problems. So he moved out for, a little bit. But we didn't know the real true inner workings of what was going on. And in February of 98, he had issues where he attempted suicide. He's going to sit on railroad tracks. And that's where it really first came to light to us that, we were floored by this. Something went wrong. And then he had to go on a 72-hour hold at his hospital. He came back and he told us that, I had a nervous breakdown, I'm getting help, all this. Well, we were sitting at the kitchen table. We ended up having to go on a call, and then he left by the time we got back. He said, I'll come back on Thursday. We'll talk a little bit more. Well, he didn't come back. We're sitting on the edge of our chairs. Where's he at? Where's he at? And then at about 1938 hours on that cold February evening, we get a call for a car explosion. I didn't know what was going on. I was the engineer that day. Uh, we got there, so I was street side, column of smoke blowing up out of the back of this apartment complex. And it turned out what he did was poured gasoline on himself and lit himself on fire.
Man.
Instinctively got out, rolled around, but somebody came out, put an extinguisher on him and things like that. But he was still alive when he was in the ambulance, but then died shortly thereafter. And that sent me reeling. And that was really the trigger for me for a 16-year battle of undiagnosed PTSD. Just really occupational stress injury, post-traumatic stress, however people call it. And I went through my phases of road rage, just anger management issues, used to get in fights with people at the fire department. During that time period, I got promoted lieutenant, and it didn't really, when some people know that they could push your buttons or you got hot buttons, they're going to do it. And one guy would always do that. And he became a fellow lieutenant. And then we'd start to have shouting matches. And the chief one time said, people were saying, we're not comfortable here. And chief said, even I wasn't uncomfortable. Then I thought, hey, there's something going on here. And one day I was just on our training board. There was a class given by a psychologist saying Introduction to Firefighter Behavioral Health. I couldn't go to it. It was too far away from where I was, but I called her up and she told her a little bit about my story. And she said, hey, you got a lot of trauma. We're starting this group called Illinois Firefighter Peer Support. I think you should apply for it. I think you would do well with this. And if you ever need to sit down and talk with somebody, you could do that. I'm always available. So I went through the class and I thought, yeah, you know what? I don't need the counseling. I'm okay. But on day 2 of this 3-day initial training, she started talking about PTSD, and there was a PowerPoint presentation. And then all of a sudden I just sat there and I'm like, this is me. She's talking about me. I have a problem here. We went on lunch break. She had given me her card previously, and I went and I made that call to make an appointment to see her for counseling. And it was during that time, and I guess this will get me to how I ended up getting in touch with yoga. But I went through maybe about 5 sessions of therapy. And then she said, you're pretty independent. I think you're okay. So I was released from therapy and I started with, just my other regimen that I did. I'm also a personal trainer, a Reiki master practitioner, which is an energy worker. I do a lot of exercise, but how I take care of myself, regular massage therapy, chiropractic care. And when I went to a new chiropractor, they had an acupuncturist there. So I've been doing this since 2015. I still get monthly acupuncture, everything to not only for musculoskeletal or other physical issues, but for this post-traumatic stress. And while I was there, one of the women who was the office manager, she said, I think you could use yoga. And it was called Kundalini yoga, which is different from what I do now. Does a lot of work with energy. And it happened to be that one of the other patients there in this office would teach it on a Monday night at the chiropractor's office. So that's how I got involved with doing yoga. And I did that from 2015 to 2020 when I moved down here to Western North Carolina. And it just opened up a whole world for me. And then you combine that with, I first experienced Reiki, the energy work, and the acupuncture, and it just started opening me up energetically and spiritually in a secular way, not from a religious way, but from just really an energetic way. And then I moved down here and I always wanted to, I think I want to become a yoga teacher. And when I was in Illinois, and you know how it is being on shift, we used to work 24, 48. I would have had to switch with people, take time off time to just to be able to meet the commitment. So when I came here, I just, was searching for a place to do yoga. And I happened to see that they were running their first ever yoga teacher training. And that's how I became a yoga teacher at the age of, started at 57 and I finished at the age of 58. And I teach a couple classes regularly uh, in my community where I live. I live in a homeowners association. So I teach there. And then once a month, I teach to veterans in Asheville. And it's a service dog yoga class. It's service dogs in training. These veterans are, they're struggling with their own issues. A lot of them are combat vets. And so they work with this organization, and I'll get it in a little bit once you ask more questions. And the dogs are present, and it's a beautiful experience to watch how these dogs go to work when they notice that a veteran might be a little bit triggered or amped up. They're laying on top of them. They're sitting next to them, cuddling with them, doing what they're being trained to do.
So it sounds like you've had very similar experiences to what so many first responders, veterans, people that listen to our podcast have been through. And, one of the things that we always talk about here on our podcast is make yourself better. Be the best you can be the best version, whatever flavor that you want to go with. But one of the things that I think is very common in the fire service is it's less of a thing than it used to be. But when you start talking about things such as yoga, people immediately have visions of people, humming and chanting and doing very new age things. And I myself have used yoga quite a bit to work through some issues with my back and my shoulder and things like that. So I understand exactly what you were saying, that there are different types, different practices, and things like that. But for a beginner, what's the best way to describe what yoga really is, to kind of simplify it down for Joe on the truck?
For Joe on a truck, well, I'll start by talking about the type of yoga that I do. And I'm not sure what you practice. There's hatha yoga, which a lot of it is more static or longer holds on poses, not super long, but longer holds. And you might work first, we're going to do the left side of the body, then the right side, just how you orient yourself in space with the different yoga poses. And then I also do, and this is what we're trained in the basic yoga teacher training that I took. It's called vinyasa or flow yoga. And we do things called sun salutations. It's all like warming up the body, doing different movements. You're flowing. You're a little bit more active with that practice versus the hatha yoga. But the biggest thing about yoga, and yoga means to join together to a union. And for me, what I got out of it, and especially the Kundalini, was it incorporated flow and some of this hatha yoga, these static poses, but it did a lot of energy. There was meditation as part of it. There was a little bit of chanting that was part of it. Things to it really helps to shake up the nervous system and get rid of things that we know that no longer serve us. What I did as soon as I finished with yoga teacher training in February of 2022, I was looking for more trauma-informed yoga stuff that I could reach out to first responders, to the military, and just through doing, internet searches, Google searches, I landed on a page called Warriors at Ease, it's headquartered in Maryland, but it's throughout the world. It's practiced throughout the world. And they have a level 1 that you could take the level 1 and you learn a lot about military culture, the different rank structure, how military life affects the service member, their families, all different types like that. But the biggest thing about the the Warriors of Ease program, and there's others out there that teach the veterans yoga for vets, uh, but this could be applied to us because if, as you know, our fire service is a paramilitary organization.
Very
We have a
true.
rank structure. We have a rank structure. You follow orders. You do things like that. So it's like the military. It's just different. We fight a different battle. We go out there on the streets. You're helping people from an EMS standpoint. You're our battle might not is not the enemy that we're fighting in war. Our battle is the fire, the dragon, however you want to can, and we have to slay the dragon, put the fire out. Uh, but the Warriors at Ease program, what that does is when we end up with like those, they call it the silent wounds of war, and it doesn't matter again, fire service, the military, we end up, with us like because I'm sure do you do peer support as well,
Yes.
Travis?
Yes, we do.
Okay, right. So that was the biggest thing for me, billing with Illinois Firefighter Peer Support. It was so gratifying being able to sit across from somebody else, being where I once was and helping them and guiding them. But you find out that we can tend to become dissociated, the mind and the body. And for me, if we just talk about like my PTSD, big time with sleep issues, road rage, even working around the house, doing the small stuff. If something didn't go right, I would blow up. It was my poor wife had to deal with this for a long time. And so we're just what happens and what I learned through Warriors at Ease. There's two areas of the brain that it fascinated me. What happens when we get this overload to the system, this high stress, this chronic stress response where your heart rate's up, breathing, you're dumping adrenaline and cortisol in your body. My mind it won't stop, it won't shut off. And the mind never does because that's its job it always has something, but you get these ruminating thoughts. And then you become disconnected from your body. Like, what is it like to actually be in your body and sit with your body? So with Warriors at Ease, it's not only yoga, the movement, but it's the breath work. And we'll do some meditation. Now I'm just starting to introduce my vets into that meditation, but you in the area of the brain, there's something called the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is a lot of your memory, your stored memories, some short and long-term memory. And then there's the amygdala, which is like a walnut-sized area in the brain, which that's your emotional response. That's the emotional side of the brain. When we end up with PTSD, and if it goes untreated for a long time, and again, there may be licensed clinical counselors that could explain this a little bit better than me. I'm just doing it from what my understanding it is. The amygdala will grow because you're in that constant ramped up emotional state, and the hippocampus shrinks. So I know I'm aging, but my memory isn't always that great. I can remember something from 50 years ago, but ask me why I walked in a garage to get something or go in a refrigerator. It's not. But then as I'm learning about this, that, with this untreated, this chronic stress response, my area of the brain that is responsible for that memory is shrinking. And the area that's the emotional side is growing. And what we try to do with the yoga, the Warriors at Ease, is to quiet the mind, but bring you back into your body. And the way I explain to them, like if we're doing a pose, give me an example of a pose that you do and with the yoga that you practice for yourself.
At Descript Master, we believe it's never too late to share your story. Our beginner-friendly training is specifically designed for passionate creators over the age of 40 who want to harness the power of video and podcasting without the tech headaches. Now, whether you're a firefighter, a first responder, or an educator who's wanting to up your game when it comes to videos, podcasting, and digital media, or you simply have some wisdom you want to share, Descript Mastery gives you the tools and the confidence you need to create professional, quality content that connects. Start telling your story today with Descript Mastery. You know, at Descript Mastery, we believe it's never too late to share your story. You know, our beginner-friendly training is specifically designed for passionate creators over the age of 40 who want to harness the power of video and podcasting without the tech headaches. Now, whether you're a firefighter, a first responder, or an educator who's wanting to up your game when it comes to videos, podcasting, and digital media, or you simply have some wisdom you want to share, Descript Mastery gives you the tools and the confidence you need to create professional, quality content that connects. Start telling your story today with Descript Mastery. One of the ones that I like is the child's pose, because that works very well with my back and my shoulder in particular. And I know that seems like a very simplistic one, but there's so many variations that I found to it that it does a lot of good. And at times I will find myself forgetting that my shoulder's hurting, or, that I've got, what's going on with my back. And I start focusing on my breathing, and I kind of get to that point to where I understand exactly what you mean. And even when I used to work out and be more active, when you get in the zone, for lack of a better term, and you start focusing on whatever that activity you're doing is, you kind of start reconnecting, and you kind of forget about what else is going on.
Right. And that's what we try to kind of do. Like a class that I run for them, it starts with, because they could be hyper vigilant, and they would be, they might be scanning them, especially if they were in war, or there's one or two guys that have traumatic brain injury.
Right.
Most have PTSD, but there's also addiction issues that go along with that they may be struggling with. Is we try to do an orientation room. You create what's called a safe container for them. And my goal is, as the instructor, I position myself with like whatever entrance to the room is, with my back to that. There I have them so they could see. And I don't know if you've ever found this in your career, that when you go out to a restaurant, you always like to be able to see what's coming and going through the front door of a restaurant.
Yes.
We'll just use that as an example. Well, it's the same thing for a veteran, and it probably would still be for any of us as first responders. So we position them so they can see what's coming and going, and I'm putting myself in between them and what might be coming through that door, or what they could perceive as a danger coming through that door. So I orient them to the room, and a lot of times I have them lie down on their back, unless, they have issues. They could sit in a chair, because I blend chair yoga and, the yoga that I do where people could stand and sit and lie down, if they don't have a lot of musculoskeletal issues. But I start by orienting them to the room. This is where this is at. This is where that. And you try to name the different walls in a room. So instead of saying turn to your left or right, face this wall, face that wall, face the front of the room, the rear of the room. And then I take them through, to try to settle them even more, take them through a journey of the senses, where you start by, and a lot of it's visualization. And what I tell them, and this is something I learned from one of my yoga teachers, she's still a friend to me, although she lives in Illinois. She said, with visualization, if you were having a day where you just absolutely could not do a certain pose, let's say that child's pose, but maybe you could sit in a cross-legged position, but you can't get yourself in that forward flexion. tell them, you visualize doing it. Whatever I'm telling you, if your body says no today, you visualize that. And she always said that the US Olympic team uses visualization. If it's good enough for them, then it's good enough for us. And I saw that in one of the recent Winter Olympics, if you remember, the uh, Chloe Kim,
Right.
when she's getting ready to go down the half pipe, she was actually at the top working through her routine, visualizing it. So it's what we try to do, visualize, but take them through their senses. Like, we'll start with the sense of taste. I want you to, maybe take a swallow. Do you have anything still residual from what you might have ate or drank before you came here today? And then you keep going through that with hearing. You start with them in their space around their mat, and especially when you get into visualization or the hearing or the sense of touch, then you expand it out a little bit further. Okay, what's next to you in the room? Maybe what's outside. What do you remember driving here to get to this building? What do you remember? Was there something that caught your eye? You're just trying to bring them, just again, it brings it a little bit more quiet, a little bit down. And then we move into a breathwork practice. And it could be various different ones, but I try to keep it simple with them. And that's how I would start with first responders, is just counting your breath. You want to try to feel the rise and fall of your belly. Try to breathe through those, even though that's just the diaphragm expanding, lowering and expanding. The breath is still coming into the lungs, but you're getting that. You can put your hands on your belly and you're getting that, the feel for it, and you're trying to bring them back into their body slowly but surely. And then we move in a practice where there's a little bit of a warm up. You're warming up the shoulders, you're warming up your neck, you're warming up the back. And then we move into certain types of practice, and we try to do things where you're doing opposites, like extend the left arm forward. Like if you know what tabletop is, right?
Right.
Where you're on your
Hmm.
you're on your hands and knees all four. Extend that left arm out and your right leg back. And try to maybe do movements with that. So then or crossing patterns. And it's just things to reorient the mind back, just bring things and settle things back into where you need to be. We're trying to bring the mind and body back. What does it feel like to be like? And I always tell them, this is your practice, it's your experience. What is it? And just accept it and welcome it just as it is. There's going to be no right or wrong for you. I'm not looking for you to do the perfect yoga pose, because I can't do that. You could look at it in the books. There's people a lot more limber than I am. Obviously, when you're younger, it's going to be that way. But you could still get younger people that they have issues.
Everything you said rings true, but I think you hit on something else that's very important. I didn't mean to cut you off with your comment there, but when you talk about the breathing, you talk about the focus, you talk about those things that aren't necessarily the poses that people associate with yoga. A lot of times that is as valuable for grounding us as going through a flow of poses as well.
Right, because you're starting for probably a good chunk of the practice. They're on the ground. They start there with all these warm up exercises. Then we move them to the kneeling position, then into the standing position. And obviously, props are offered like blocks. They could use chairs. And I want all my fellow first responders out there that might be listening to this, just like we've always talked about in peer support, asking for help is not a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's actually one of the most courageous things you could do for yourself. And we do have this, there's still a stigma attached to mental health issues, but I'm here to say it's okay to be vulnerable and authentic. Get the help if you're struggling. See, if you have to start at the peer support level, start there. And if they guide you to go to see a counselor, please do it. And really what yoga, the yoga here, and especially the trauma informed, it's to, you become vulnerable and authentic, but when you're in this room, there's no judgments there. And a core thing for especially the veteran, and even it would be us in a first responder, because once you have that separation from service, sometimes you lose that. You're going to lose that camaraderie because you're not in a firehouse every day. As with a veteran, if they were active, they were in combat, they get out. They don't have that feeling of that connectedness.
Hmm.
Who's watching my back? Who
Right.
is with me? And when you're in the heat of the battle, uh, a core thing for this type of yoga is if we set up a community and they come on a regular basis, they're regaining that sense of camaraderie.
Right.
Because you could go anywhere in the world and talk to another firefighter, and it's like you're sitting in your own firehouse.
Right.
Most departments, especially when you're visiting, they'll be welcoming. They'll show you around. They'll give you what we used to call the nickel tour. But it's the same thing, bringing them in and just realizing that you're there for you. You're not there for anybody else. But it's really about the grounding. In reality, yoga starter word had nothing to do with doing all these poses, all these flows. It was about sitting and taking that seat in meditation. There may be injuries, they can't do it, and I'm cool with that. We've gotten to the point now that we'll hug each other. Hey, brother, what's going on? Or we'll laugh. It's not a strict practice.
Tim, the thing I really appreciate you doing today is the fact that you've kind of pulled the veil back a little bit on yoga. You've taken some of the, I guess, some of the fear out of it, because a lot of guys are fearful of, man, this is what ladies do, or something like that. And you've peeled that back, and it's helped us to understand that it is rooted in our mental fitness, and like anything else, we want our bodies to be strong. We want our minds to be strong.
Right.
I had a guy tell me not too long ago. He said, it's okay for adversity to shape you, but don't let it define you. And
That is correct.
that's kind of what I'm taking away from this, is the fact that each of us may have a different way that we need to follow, whether it be the yoga, the breathing, whatever the case is. But it's there, and there are people that understand the needs of first responders and veterans and
Right.
firefighters and all that. And I really appreciate the fact that you brought that to the table today, and you helped us to understand the importance of these things. But if somebody wants to learn more about you, your programs, the yoga that you're doing for vets and first responders, where can they get some information about that at?
They could get a hold of me. My website, my business is called Mind Body Badge Yoga. And that's an ode to
Hmm.
uh, doing the mind body work and honoring what I did, wearing a badge for over 25 years. But the actual website, the URL is www.timothyggrutzius.com. And again, I'll email you this. I think you should already have that
It'll be in
from,
the notes, I promise. And your website is quite fascinating too. And I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us and taking time to reach out and to share your story too. And I think all of us have a different version of the story that defines us for where we're at. And it's great to know that there are tools in our toolbox that we can use, like yoga, to be
right.
able to address it. Tim, thank you again for being with us. And as we always say here on our podcast, light your fire within.